right to it then. So the signal is the executive state. Someone was recently trying to convince me that the reason for their psychological looping dysfunction, chronic looping psychological malfunctioning, meaning they couldn't get their psychological aspect on track and in alignment, and they were saying that the reason for that was that there was an executive malfunctioning, or they said dysfunction, and it was attempted to be conveyed that something called ADHD or similar pathological labels could be accurately pointed at as the culprit for this executive dysfunction. And I'd never heard that articulation style before. And so for context, I went for a walk deep into the forest, and I came back changed. And that's a metaphor for the spiritual journey. And, Christ consciousness, Jesus Christ, Siddhartha Gautama, Buddha, Tathagata, self-realization, Rajakriya Yoga, Shipibo, plant medicine, shamanism, Wu Wei, Gung Fu, Shaolin, Kung Fu. These things merged into a zero-pointed stillness that others started to see in me, and they were like, "Yo, what are you doing, or how are you doing?" And I'd say, "Oh, you're looking at Rocco, but Rocco isn't the aspect of me that's doing it. Actually, what you're pointing at is the state of me, which is dislodged from Rocco, which you seem to want, or at least you seem to be interested in understanding how I experienced my transformation into that. Meaning, how did I experience enlightenment, realization, clarification?" And so now I do these sessions. I do this kind of dharmic service work. I call it mirror sessions. And this was a session where someone was telling me that they were like, the reason why this has been happening is I have an executive dysfunction. And I just heard a squirrel over here. I mean, it could have been a bird, but it sounded like a squirrel, even if it was a squirrel or a bird. There's no executive function happening there other than life. The only time there's any kind of executive dysfunction is when the mind isn't on the same page as the body. The statement here wanted to be made is, there is no executive function other than you. You are Christ. You are the Atman. You are as I am. The one, infinite, absolute, space and non-space, where all comes from. Why is there any yoga happening or any alchemy happening is because the executive, which you could call the mind, is the thing or the faculty that's operating the rest of the situation. So it's called executive. Like in a business structure, it's a potentially relevant metaphor because you have choice makers and then you have employees. So the metaphor being executive dysfunction or function being the mind, the psychology, your psyche, your mental state, and your ability to be mentally efficient and on the same page as your body and your emotions. So there's synergy. If that synergy isn't there, then the blame needs to go somewhere. Or that's what the tibis tries to do. The tibis is like a spiritual funny bone that is reverberating. And that reverberation is karmic energy. And I call it the tibis, space-time-based identity structure, but most people call it the ego. But you try to point at the ego, and you can't really, because the thing that you would use to point at the ego is the ego. So all self-realization is about neutralizing that functional aspect of the self so that it's synergizing with exterior, interior. And so this space that's otherwise it's a membrane, it's a membrane that's the space in between the inside and the outside. And that's where someone gets inspired to move into the spiritual journey from, because it's not a functional place to live from. It'll make you crazy. And that's where craziness happens. It's where insanity happens. It's the misidentification of the self with the mind. So the statement really is here. There is no executive other than the true self. And so any attempt to I got ADHD, or I got any kind of thing that you're pointing at through your body, even if you're pointing at your body, you're still functioning from the place of your awareness. Now you're pointing at your psychological excuse for not being clear. That's all you're doing. So you can point at your broken toe, you can point at diabetes, you can point at bad genetics. It's all bullshit, really. And yeah, you can find a Western left-brain scientist to back up your story and confirm your bias that you're broken. But you could also look for a perspective that would confirm for you your inevitable resolution of that same bacteria tissue that was malfunctioning. You could find a perspective that confirms that thing malfunctioning is inevitably meant to inspire that which remedies it. What remedies that is Christ, is you, is the Atma, is your soul self, conscious, waking, baking in an oven, convection, conductor, ion, temple called Christ. Jesus is a mirror for you. Gautama is a mirror for you. Yogananda is a mirror for you. And you can simplify your executive dysfunction by bypassing it. Stop emphasizing it so much. You don't bypass, let's say you're saying, I want to be healthy, but my obesity is the thing that I can't be healthy. It's why I can't be healthy. Well, yeah, that's why you want to go and work out. So let's say Raja Yoga is what the executive dysfunction needs in order to resolve and become coherent and cohesive, so that it's not a mind that's distorting things, it's a mind that's simplifying things. So in this metaphor, Raja Yoga would regulate and then eventually resolve completely all mental, psychological, executive dysfunction. And in the same metaphor, working out and cardio and a diet and getting the thyroid active and, etc. Working out, let's say, being active and being conscious of your food intake would regulate or potentially absolve or dissolve the experience of obesity. Your versus the experience of, very different. Yeah, but my obesity is the thing that makes me, it's all resistance. You're just looking for a reason why it's not working. That's all that's in the way of it working. It's a subtle little paradox moment, but if you make your mind the executive, you're surely going to be bankrupt soon. If you make God, this is not a concept either. This is like functional reality. Nature is not struggling with this issue. And Raja Yoga, Hatha Yoga is supporting Raja Yoga. You got to get in the body. This is an interesting thing too. Folks that sometimes go to these plant medicines and like live there in this kind of, I need to look at my trauma. Yeah, but I'm not done healing yet. I think I need to, I need to look at more trauma. It's a place where you can get stuck. And I wedged there for a while in my journey. I wanted a certification so that I could be like, I know how to help someone regulate their vagus nerve and navigate trauma. It's relevant for me, for my particular journey. It's not for everybody's. And it is a very interestingly sticky place where souls get stuck and loop more. You'll loop in a echo chamber for as long as you need to until the energy gets amplified enough so that then the echo chamber itself hops into a new chamber. It's this idea of like, the procrastination, I keep procrastinating. It's like, you need to keep procrastinating until it becomes so outrageously unpleasant for you that you stop procrastinating. So procrastination is an excuse. My executive mind aspect, psychological aspect, I have a disorder and ADHD, I can't function. Well, for sure, keep dysfunctioning then. You're gonna keep it dysfunctioning until you need to function. If you don't need to function, the mind will find a place for you to leak into so that you're distracted from what's needing to happen for your soul to evolve. You'll pocket. It's like water. Water will trickle down, and then if this is gravitationally pulling the water down the rocks as the rain flows through these cracks and crevices, then the water's going to pool there. Water will pool there until it fills up, and once that's filled up, the water won't pool there anymore. It'll go around it. And as a dam works, it'll just dam up until the water pressure gets too intense, and then at some point it'll break through and bust through. The pressure will be greater than the strength of the structure preventing the flow. Same way that consciousness works through your toroidal field. There's an electromagnetic prism around the body. And it's how consciousness is flowing in and through as you. So this is why Qigong is much more relevant for some than sitting meditation. So you start interacting with your toroidal field, and you'll find pockets where your body, like my left shoulder right now, is asking for attention. And so I have some stuck energy here personally. I can find that same thing when I'm sitting and being still, but it's not as easy for everyone to find that when you're sitting and being still. So maybe movement is needed. Maybe stillness isn't what's needed. That's it. Listen to the real executive, not the small executive. The shareholders. There's only one shareholder. And if there isn't, then get your shares back. Dissolve that. Liquidate that. Sell the stocks. Take no more stock. You have to actively pull your investment out from the time, space, identity. That's the only place where there has been a mistake in identity. There's been a mistake. It's been mistaken because of the senses. The senses have stored the self in time, and they're frozen. They're calcified into these structural nodes, and the mind says, that's me, and then that's also me, and then that's me. And then I have a story about how that is me, and it references it. And where do you go as soon as you reference it? Time. You have to go into time to reference your story. Your story is the stored E, the stored I. The E is from the I. The E, the energy, comes from the eternal self. So Paramatma is where Jiva Atma comes from. Jiva Atma calcifies, and then ego comes about. Ego comes about so that eventually Jiva Atma can see that it's not that, and it turns around. and wants to go where it comes from, just like water has to eventually. That's it. Sell your shares quick while the I'm sure there's a good metaphor here for like stock trading analogy, like sell now, sell it while it's high, something like that.